Now that we have a better understanding of what occurred in 2015 and what companies focused on, let's take a look at some of the top domain strategies going into 2016. First is to implement and enforce policies. You may already have clearly defined policies in place, and if you do, that's a great start. But businesses, their needs continually change and evolve, and companies need to ensure that their policies are still in line with their business objectives. If you don't have any policies in place, over-registration occurs, and you'll find yourself with a costly, bloated, or misaligned domain portfolio. Not only should your internal policies address what, when, and where domains should be registered, who is allowed to request a registration, and any kind of budget limitations, they should clearly identify the criteria for domains to let expire or sell. And then another key point is to work with stakeholders to determine where domains should point. And don't just define the policies, really make sure that they are implemented and enforced. So make portfolio consolidations part of your domain policies. It allows you better control and visibility into your domain portfolio. If you haven't consolidated your portfolio, or if you've recently acquired another company, work with marketing, IT, e-commerce, your legal group to identify registrations. These groups could provide insight into where and why certain domains were registered. Another way to identify domains that need to be consolidated is to compare your trademark holdings against domain registrations. Using a tool like MarkMonitor's Domain Intelligence allows companies to quickly identify where trademarks are registered and where the corresponding domains are registered. And then you could also use tools like MarkMonitor's Reverse Who Is that helps to uncover lost registrations. You can search by email address, phone number, company name, and quickly uncover domains you were not aware that you had. So another key strategy for 2016 is to ensure your domain strategies are aligned with your policing and enforcement programs. Companies will continue to face tough registration and renewal decisions this year. And it's not enough just to have a domain strategy in place. Now more than ever, companies need to combine their registration renewal strategies with the policing and enforcement programs. Now is the time to ensure your domain registrations that should consist of proper levels of coverage, focus on corporate online objectives, categorize your brands to help ensure that your registrations are aligned with your trademark coverage, and implement a monitoring program that allows you to quickly identify potential domain abuse and then allows you to take immediate action when that abuse does occur. Leverage things like URS and URP, and then also take advantage of domain back ordering to recover some of those infringing domains. So when we talk about ensuring appropriate levels of coverage, brands determined to be core or key are typically those brands that require greater coverage. You can look at variations, misspellings, and typo-squats in the .com domain for those types of assets. For important or limited brands, focus on exact match registrations unless you encounter significant cyber squatting. That would change your strategy. Brands with more than 5,000 instances of registration abuse in a .com should typically be treated as a key brand. Align those domain with trademark coverage. So if you have a trademark registered in a particular country, like France, have that corresponding .fr domain also registered. Using an automated tool like I talked about earlier about domain intelligence can help you quickly accomplish that coverage and make sure your registrations are accurate. When identifying where to register, you should ensure that your domains provide adequate adequate coverage, but it's also important to think about future marketing needs. If your objective is to maximize your exposure on the web and generate e-commerce revenue, you should focus on geographic locations where you have an office or do business, TLDs that support that worldwide sales and marketing efforts, all legacy GTLDs, select new GTLDs, and top 10, 25, or e-commerce countries. If your company's culture is one that is extremely risk-averse, then registering defensively may make sense. Those extensions that are most at risk for cyber squatting include popular legacy GTLDs, free or low-cost unrestricted CCTLDs, and unrestricted generic new GTLDs. Now, while registering defensively can help ensure that your clients find you, it does not negate the need for actively monitoring for abuse. So we all know that defensive registrations no longer ensure protection. You must align your registration strategies with your policing and enforcement programs. You should also leverage blocking where you can, but know that if your brand is generic, you may not be able to block your brand. Monitor for abusive registrations and take appropriate action when it occurs. In general, you can start with a cease and desist letter. You can leverage URS, UDRP, or the ADR. Use rights protection mechanisms and use domain backordering or anonymous acquisitions as possible methods of recovery. If you don't know what your enforcement options are, you don't know your best course of action, MarkMonitor can help you identify your best course of action. So many companies are frequent targets of infringements, and it makes recovery of all those infringements impractical from a cost perspective. Brand owners should develop a prioritizing ranking system to allow for a recovery strategy that matches the significance of the threat. Sending a cease and desist is often the most cost-effective option, but compliance by the domain owner is completely voluntary. Cease and desist have higher success rates when the registrant has registered the domain without knowledge of their infringement. They're a good option if quick recovery is not critical. If the domain is regarded as a nice-to-have rather than a business-critical domain, if the UDRP ADR option is a viable escalation, it should the cease and desist fail. URS is one of the rights protection mechanisms introduced with the new GTLD program. While the cost relative to UDRP is appealing, it's important to understand that it only applies to new GTLDs and select CCTLDs. And a successful judgment only suspends the domain. You cannot transfer it to your ownership. In addition, the URS is more strict than the UDRP, and brand owners must demonstrate infringement by a clear and convincing standard of evidence. URS is a good option if suspension rather than recovery is an acceptable outcome. If legal rights in the form of a registered or common law trademark exist, and the current usage of the domain violates your trademark rights. The UDRP is applicable to all GTLDs, including new GTLDs and some CCTLDs. A successful judgment allows you to either transfer it to your control or you can request that the domain be deleted, but I think that almost never happens. UDRP is a good option if quick recovery, typically 3 to 4 months, is not of critical concern. If legal right in the form of a registered or common law trademark exists, and current usage violates the mark holder's rights and or represents a reputational or security issue. Domain backordering, or you may know it as domain snapping, is another low-cost recovery option that only allows for recovery of domains that are not renewed by the current owner. Backordering is not always successful and shouldn't be relied upon for business-critical domains. Backordering has changed since the early days where domains were deleted upon the true expiration date. Now providers have exclusive rights to resell their expired domain names, and multiple requests for the same domain through the same provider could result in auction and increased cost. The key to utilizing the backorder option is to backorder through multiple backorder providers if you do choose to go with that option. Domain acquisition should be considered over other recovery options if you have an imminent new product or service launch, there's a lack of provable bad faith, you're under a tight deadline, or UDRP or ADR are not viable options. When using the acquisition option, some of the best practices include determining the budget and strategy early on and setting expectations that are in line with the domain's value. It's important to consider the owner and how the domain is being used, and purchasing the domain anonymously can help keep those purchase prices at a lower range than a business openly negotiating the purchase on their own.